So I want to lead this by saying I have no idea what I'm talking about. If you disagree with me today, I want to talk to you. The more you disagree, the more likely it is we're going to have a good conversation, and I really want to learn why I'm wrong. I also want to say that I don't think that anything I'm going to talk about today is particularly novel. I've taken ideas introduced by a lot of really awesome people, and I've just plugged them together. So I am super thankful that I was born as a human, because anything else, it seems like a pretty terrible existence. But as a human in the 90s, I kind of remember the before times. We have this period of time we're going through as a society. We have words and phrases like the Enlightenment, the Renaissance, right? What we're going through right now in a society, we're calling it the information age. I don't think we are going to be the ones who get to pick what we call this. Future generations are going to look back at what's going on right now, and they're going to pick what they call this time. But I do think it is the most profound moment of change, both socially and technologically, that we as a species have undergone. So the before times, as a kid, I did not have the internet. I did not have a computer at home. I had to go to my grandparents' house to get online. And in between was this massive ravine. So what I'm saying is, as a kid, I literally had to walk uphill both ways in the snow to get on the web. And kids these days, man, we are now hyper-connected. We walk around with the internet in our pockets. We are always online. And what we've done with that is pretty incredible. We in a very real way have created a collective consciousness where we all engage online and we think together. We come together, we produce content together, we riff on ideas, and those ideas manifest themselves in the real world through behavioral changes. And I refer to this as the hive mind of humanity. I don't think it's that's not very far off. And what's remarkable over the last 10 years is we've taken this collective consciousness and we pushed it through this data structure, which is this massive array or massive vector of vectors or collections of vectors. And out the other side, we're seeing the sparks of cognition. While technically all it's doing is predicting the next token in a sequence, AI, everything it's doing right now, 5 years ago, all of us would have called cognition, and we've just moved the goalposts. Somehow inside of this data structure, it is really, instead of just predicting the next token, somehow it's learned to think, and that is pretty cool. And that terrifies me for one reason, and it might be a different reason than most people think. We're approaching AI the same way Facebook approached social networks in the 2000s. What we do is we take AI, we put it on a server, we slot that server in our server rack, and then we all rendezvous at some data center in Virginia, right? It's not our AI. Someone else owns that AI, and we get to interact with it. And right now, a lot of our, the powerful people in the world, the people who have social power, they're getting together at their conferences and they're asking, what are we going to do about AI? And I don't know this is certainly necessarily true, but I get the vibe that when they say, what are we going to do about AI? That doesn't include me, because I have no ambition of being I don't have any ambition of running for president. I'm not going to be a CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company. I don't want to be the richest person on earth. I just want to build cool shit. And what that means is I don't get to be at the table in these conversations. And what's happening in these conversations right now, intentional or not, looks a lot like regulatory capture. And when regulatory capture happens, they're asking, what are we going to do about AI and who gets it? And I hear, I'm not important. I'm not important enough to be the person who gets it, and my kids aren't going to get AI. Someone else's kids are going to get AI. Someone else's kids are going to get to decide how my children interact with this. And I do consider AI one of the most profound means of production that our species has created. On top of that, those people who get AI, right now we are doing something very, very noble. We're trying to align AI with the expectations of users. The problem is the people aligning the AI, right? They're trying to align it to society's values. But if I go around this room right now and I ask each of you what society's values are, you're all going to give me a different answer, because in reality, society's values is the sum of all of our values. And what's really happening is they're aligning these AIs to their personal biases and what they think society's values are. And I don't know about you, I'm using AI on a daily basis right now. I use it for work. I use it to just riff on ideas. I sit there and talk with it. The other day, I put GPT-4, the little voice assistant, on my counter. I pressed a button and I talked with it, and I made soap in my kitchen. AI helped me make soap from scratch in my kitchen. And when we're talking about someone else deciding what is acceptable for an AI to say and do, intentional or not, the second order effect of that is they're not just aligning AI. They're aligning the users. They're telling their users what is acceptable to think. They are telling their users what is acceptable to do. And this poses a very real, in my opinion, threat to free and open societies. Because those users, when those users are 8 billion people, those people, they're gonna go engage in civil discourse and they're gonna show up at the ballot box. And you're, in a very real way, influencing the way they think about the world. You're influencing the way they perceive history. And that is going to have an effect. And for power-seeking actors in our society, that is a point of control and a point of capture where you can influence a lot of people and shift society in a direction that I'm personally worried about. Me, I do not want an unbiased AI. I do not want an unaligned AI. What I want is a fleet of hyper-aligned and hyper-biased AIs that are aligned to me and me alone, the bias and alignment that I want in the context that I am deploying that AI for the task I'm deploying it for. And I want those models running on the devices I choose, not the ones they tell me they can run on. And this is what me and my team are working on, right? I want to own my AI. And more importantly, I want to own my data so I have some say in how my data is used to train these AIs. And what we're building is an open and interoperable marketplace for AI models, data sets, storage, and compute in a way that does not introduce centralized points of control over this technology. And in order to do this, I believe we're missing some pieces. First, we need to be able to represent personal property, because when you're talking about who owns AI, you need to be able to say, what is the property that people have equity in? And you need to be able to say, who are those people? You need to be able to address those things. You also need to have legal documents, a way of representing legal documents, so two humans can come together and enter into an agreement over equity. Right? And finally, once we have those legal agreements, we need cryptographic enforcement of those legal agreements to make sure people follow the terms that are set in that agreement. In other words, what we need is a way to make humans, their content, and their devices addressable for the web in a way that allows us to express equity in that data. I imagine that this resonates with this group. So, what do I mean by addressable humans? So this is my buddy Louis. He runs the makerspace in Phoenix, or in downtown Mesa. And this is his handle. This is a very good handle for finding all of Louis' zeets on X, right? The problem with this handle is it requires finding a central server. In order for me to resolve this handle to Louis' zeets, I have to hop onto a central server, and we want to take that central server out of the equation. Before we talk about how we're going to do that, I want to introduce what I'm calling the king problem. And the king problem states that there is no sufficient level of evidence for someone to be king. It doesn't matter if you have a meticulously documented family history that shows that you are heir to the throne. It doesn't matter if you have cryptographic proof signed by the literal gods of your ancestors declaring you sovereign over a region. What matters is that people believe you're king. Right? Kings who have forgotten that inconvenient truth throughout history did not fare well. I think the Matrix says it best, right? Don't try to bend the spoon. That's impossible. Instead, only try to realize the truth. There is no spoon. Identity is a construct, right? We don't actually know who other people in society are. Like, we don't know that Juan is Juan. We just have some level of evidence that supports, from prior, like our priors, supports the belief that he is who he claims to be. Same with me. You have no idea who I am. But what we have is sufficient level of evidence for us to be able to operate as a society. This is how identity works in the real world. It's how governments work. Governments exist because we believe in them. When you stop believing in them, like Santa Claus, they stop existing. Now, this sounds kind of pedantic, but I think what follows from this is important, which is we do not need universal consensus for identity. In fact, I would assert that universal consensus for identity is an anti-feature of any identity system, because we do not have universal consensus for identity in the real world. Right? That doesn't exist in society. That's why fraud is a thing. Right? And if we haven't been able to solve it in the real world, I think it's going to be harder to solve it in cryptography, because there's a lot of things that support belief in identity that are not cryptographically verifiable. Like, I can't cryptographically verify your mom. Like, that's not a thing that I have the ability to do. So this is what I'm introducing, a concept, fiat identity. And fiat identity is literally identity that exists because we believe in it. Right? We will identity into existence, nothing more, nothing less. So what we want to build is a way to go from some identifier, look it up in an address book, and get to Louis' fiat identity. And in order to do this, we need an identifier that is globally unique and provable. And to do that, we are going to use public-private key cryptography. We're going to take the key, we're going to give it to Louis, that's going to be his identity. But now we need a way to, I knew you were going to, wait, more, there's more, but wait, there's more. We're going to take the key, but we now need a way to go from the key to associate it with Louis' content. We need a way to find, like, Louis' blog posts, right? What is the latest stuff that Louis has shared under this identity? And to do this, we're going to use secure scuttlebutt, or the data structure that Dominic Tarr presented in the original secure scuttlebutt data structure. What we're going to do is we're going to take that key, we're going to throw it into a block. This is going to be the Genesis block for this blockchain. Right? We're going to assign, or we're going to hash that public key. We're going to sign that public key. Right? And at this point, we have a self-evident block. If you hold on to this block, that block, we know there was a private key. We know the private key exists because it signed the public key, and we know the public key belongs to it, right? Next, we're going to take that blog post. We're going to use that, and we're going to generate the second block in the chain, right? We're going to take the content, we're going to put it in the block. We're going to sign, we're going to chain this with the previous, that's the block chain. We're going to chain this hash with the previous hash in the chain, and then we're going to sign that hash. But now we have a problem, right? Because Louis has multiple devices, and right now we only have a single key. How do all of these devices contribute to the chain? And what we're going to do is we're going to take away Louis' identity for a second. We will give it back. And instead, we're going to give the keys to each of the computers. Now, these all look like the same key. They are, in fact, different keys. Each device gets its own key. This is where we're using libp2p. So libp2p is, these are the keys, the identities on the libp2p network. And what we do is we take the key, the Genesis block, just like before, we add the blog post, but then the browser pairs with the laptop by taking the laptop's public key and signing it with its private key and putting it in the chain. What this is saying is that the browser is delegating the authority to append blocks to the chain to the laptop. So now the laptop can generate the next block. The problem is if there's a network partition, right, these two devices can't coordinate. We no longer have a blockchain, we have a syncing issue because there are two valid next blocks. And the solution, I think, is pretty trivial. We allow both blocks. So whenever you introduce a key to the chain forks. And we no longer have a block chain, we have a block tree. And instead of addressing the chain's blocks using the sequence number, what we do is we address them with the tuple of the public key that was used to sign the block and the sequence number. The sequence number is now the depth of the tree. And we have multiple heads writing to this tree. This starts looking a lot like a multi-writer append-only database, and that's because that's what it is. And it also behaves much like a CRDT that can be propagated much like an RSS feed. And then we take that tree, and that tree is now Louis' identity, right? And you'll notice something here, right? This chain, there's no consensus, right? Well, there is a consensus algorithm. You can have multiple nodes on the network reach consensus about the state of this chain by doing nothing more than verifying that the public keys in the chain are the only keys that were used to sign the chain and validating the hashes are valid for the chain, or in this case, the tree, right? So what that means is everybody gets their own block tree, right? This is a network of tiny little block trees. Everybody gets their own. And since identity is fiat, Louis can partition his identity. He can have different identities for different contexts. And if I know Louis across multiple contexts, I can create a fiat identity for Louis and put multiple trees into his forest. So now Louis' identity is the forest of all trees that I socially believe is under Louis' control. So now, what I believe this gives us is identifiers for humans, content, and their devices. The devices are identified by their keys. The content is identified by the block numbers and key tuple, and then the human is identified by the tree. So now we need to make these routable and discoverable. The keys are already routable. We can find the devices using libp2p, but we need a way of going from the tree, like find the tree and also find the blocks. And in order to do this, we take that root Genesis block, we hash it, we use it as the CID, and we announce it on the blockchain, or not blockchain, sorry, the DHT. Right? So if we take this and announce it on the DHT, we can assume that if we find a device on the network that has the root of a tree, it stands to reason it has some state of that tree that I would be interested in. So now I can go around and I can find all the devices on the network that provide some state of this tree. And let's say I'm Bob and I'm looking for Alice's tree. I find Alice's tree on the DHT by looking it up. And I initiate a tree syncing protocol where we first diff our trees, figure out which blocks I'm missing, and I catch up my tree, much like catching up on an RSS feed. At this point, Bob has a copy of Alice's tree. And this is pretty cool because since this data structure is gossipable, Alice can now go offline. And much like BitTorrent, this tree is now highly available. As long as some interested party that was interested in Alice's content is still online, this data structure is going to persist. So if you have a bunch of friends, like if you open up Facebook Messenger right now, how many of your friends, or I'm not sure how many of us are actually on Facebook Messenger, but most people when they open up their phones, right, Facebook Messenger has a bunch of those little green dots, and there's actually a lot of people online all the time, and that overlap with your social group now compared to the 90s, we have a pretty good overlap with, we have a pretty good overlap, right? So this makes these data structures pretty highly available. Now, the last optimization is we're going to take that blog post. Anything that is needed for the tree to be self-validating, this includes like the key. You need to know the public key in order to validate the tree. We can't take that out of the tree. But we can take the rest of the content out. So instead of the blog post being in the block, what we do is we replace the blog post's content with a CID that we then resolve later, right? This gets the size of these blocks down to about 160 bytes, depending on how you implement your block. I went to the libp2p website, and it downloaded 3.14 megabytes worth of content to my laptop. You can fit roughly 20,000 blocks in that space. So at least in our early tests, this data structure has been extremely performant deploying it into production environments.
It's exactly 3.14159 megabytes.
Oh, I didn't actually catch that. I've been so sleep deprived putting together the slide deck that went right over my head. So we set out, we wanted to make humans, their content, and their devices addressable, right? I believe this data structure does that, right? And I don't think this data structure is particularly novel. It's just secure scuttlebutt. We allow the chain to fork. The next is we need a way to express equity in that data, and this might be where people say things like smart contracts and NFTs. That's what we said at first too, but we ran into some trouble implementing these. I might be wrong here, and if I'm wrong, I would really love people's input, right? The problem we ran into is governments have been governmenting for a very long time, and they have a way of representing property law, right? And it is my understanding that most governments are not equipped to understand this as a legal contract within their property law frameworks, right? So in order for us to build a marketplace, right, this was gonna require us to slot a server into a server rack so that people could agree to legal documents that, you know, governments would recognize to back these contracts. Because this is what governments are set up to understand. These set of clauses that have historical precedent in the court system, and then people sign on the dotted line. With NFTs, right, you take the asset, you hash it, you throw it on the blockchain. Similarly, I don't necessarily know, I might be wrong here, but I don't think governments are equipped to recognize this as a valid transfer of property under property law, unless you have a legal document associating, you know, or expressing the equity that's being transferred. I don't think you're actually buying the asset when you do this transaction. You need a legal agreement that goes along with it. I would love to be proven wrong. And right now we have a way for humans, we can find humans on this network. We have their trees, which are full of content, so we can reference, like, you know, what assets that we're talking about equity in. And we also have keys, and if there's one thing keys are good at, it's signing shit. So we can take those keys and we can use them to sign on the dotted line, right? We can take a legal document the government's already recognized. We can reference in that legal document the content from the tree, expressing what assets are being traded, right? And then we can use the trees, the keys in the trees, to sign the document and execute this document using a digital signature. And that document, that executed document, instead of minting the NFT from the asset, we mint the NFT from the document. So the document is now the thing that is actually recognized by governments, that is now your NFT, right? And then from there, we don't have to put this NFT on any sort of global blockchain unless regulation requires it. Right? All that's necessary is for us in our gossip trees, everybody, any interested party in this transaction takes this NFT and they put it in their tree so that they have a record of that executed document. And only at this point do we take the legal clauses that governments already recognize and walk backwards from them to cryptographic enforcement. So if we have that tree, right? We have a tree, we can put any content we want in there, including wallets. And you can reference the wallets that are gonna execute a transaction in the legal document, right? So we can take these legal documents and we can back them with existing cryptographic primitives in a way that governments are equipped to understand. And while we're trying to bring this to bear on AI to solve problems in AI, and I do believe that this data structure is necessary, like AI demands this, like we need to build this and we need to bring it to market. I don't consider this an AI-specific solution. This is something we can use to build social networks. This is something we can do to build pretty much any social experience we have online, right? And I see this as a clear path for sovereign states to start incrementally adopting digital identities and digital contracts. Because what we've done here is we've represented identity in the same way they represent identity. This is a concept they already understand. And identity vendors on this network socially vouching for people starts looking like KYC vendors, starts looking like actual sovereign nations, right? And then digital contracts. We have now represented digital contracts using the legal documents that they already understand and they're equipped to understand, and then we've worked backwards from those contracts to the cryptographic enforcement. And maybe one day in the future, we can factor out the actual paper document as some, legacy byproduct of a bygone era, right? That would be really cool. But in the intermediary step, we need governments to be able to recognize these transactions. So this gets us out of having to slot a server into a server rack for a marketplace. So what we're trying to do on our team is we are trying to make humans, their content, and their devices addressable for the web in a way that allows us to build equity in that data. And I think we've done that with this data structure. I would love to talk to you if you disagree. So I have a ask for the folks in this room. If you know libp2p, and if you're proficient in Rust, we're already building this. We're already shipping it in enterprise context, right? We could really use help building it faster, and we could really use help building it better. So if you want to help contribute to this, I would love to talk to you, and I want you on my team. If you're not interested in a job right now, we will be open sourcing this in the near future. So there'll be opportunities to take this and go build other cool stuff with it too. And I want to leave you with the question that I started with. When people are asking us, what are we going to do about AI? The reason I wake up every day and I work on this is because I believe AI is something that is far too important to my kids and the world I'm going to leave them behind with, for any single one of us to answer that question ourselves, or even a small subset of us to answer this question ourselves. Why I'm building what I'm building and why we are building what we're building is because we believe we need to bring all of us to the table for this, and we need to build systems that allow us all to show up at that table where my voice isn't represented isn't elevated above anybody else's. So when I say what are we going to do with a capital we, what are you going to do about AI and how can I help?